You know him from Sea Shepherd and his work saving whales with Greenpeace. But somehow Captain Paul Watson found himself out of a job. What happened? Hear from Watson himself next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil, Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, Captain Paul Watson of Sea Shepherd and Greenpeace fame. He's the Save the Whale guy at Greenpeace until suddenly they wanted him out. Watson tells us what happened. It's all in his new book, Hitman for the Kindness Club. Here's my conversation with Captain Paul Watson on this edition of the PETA Podcast. I'm taken by the title, Hitman for the Kindness Club. Right there, you got me.
Oh, do you want to know the origin of that title?
Well, Hitman for the Kindness Club almost begs for a question.
Well, when I was 10 years old, I was a member of the Kindness Club, which was a group that was set up by the wife of the Premier of New Brunswick in Canada, the very conservative Premier, but his wife set up the Kindness Club to, just to instruct children to be kind to animals. And I was a member of that. And later, about 12 years later, I was leading the campaign to protect seals on the east coast of Canada. And on the way back from the campaign, which got a lot of publicity, I stopped by to see Ida Fleming and, to visit with her. And as I left, she said, "You've become the hitman for the Kindness Club."
Ah, and it stuck, right?
Yeah. But I think it's just that, through the years since I was 11 years old until now, it just the book is a recounting of all the various activities. I'm pretty much known for protecting whales and seals and things on the ocean, but over the years I've been involved with wolves and elephants and bison and domestic animals and rescuing rabbits. So there's all those things. So a lot of those stories I'd never told before.
Yeah, I noticed that in your book. It really is a childhood journey through your career as an activist, not just as a kid, but you're an activist at a very young age. And you were remarkably bold, I thought. You pulled a BB gun out of another boy's hands when he was shooting birds, you mentioned?
Dixie Ray, the former governor of deceased governor now of Washington State, she wrote a book called Trashing the Planet. And she said, evidence of Watson's insanity can be found that when he was 12, he shot a boy in the rear end with a BB gun who was about to kill a bird. She said, any boy that would shoot another boy to protect a bird has to be crazy. And I said to her, well, in my neighborhood, every boy shot every other boy with a BB gun. I just happen to have a practical reason to shoot the kid that I did.
So it happened. It was real.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no qualms. How old were you? 12?
I was 12 at the time. Yeah. But I saved the bird. So that was good.
Yeah. And what did your mom say? Or what did your parents say? Paul, really? BB gun?
Well, my mother died at an early age. So, my father was not really much of a father because I left home when I was 15. So I really didn't have any parental discipline because they simply weren't there.
Yeah. All right. So, but what a 12-year-old doing this is what? There's no buffer. There's nothing to prevent you from saying, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. You did it boldly, and now you're talking about it. What was it in you as a 12-year-old, do you think?
Well, it actually started when I was 10 years old. I spent the summer swimming with a family of beavers. And every day I was down there swimming with these beavers at the beaver pond because I lived in a very rural area in eastern Canada. The next summer when I went back, I was very excited to see the beavers again, but they weren't there. And I found out that trappers had taken them all during the winter. And so I got very angry. That winter I walked the trap lines. I found out why the trap lines were, walked them, and freed animals from the traps and destroyed the traps. And I guess I've been doing the same thing for the last 50 years.
So you noticed a change with the beavers, and that just, there was there's no going back. I mean, that sort of determined, because you really, in the book, you show how you progressed to interrupting duck hunts with kites, destroying leg hold traps. It seems like your childhood was the foundation for your life's work, huh?
Well, it was writer Farley Mowat, a very famous Canadian naturalist and writer. He said that the problem with Paul Watson is he never grew up. And he says, and I hope he never does.
Now, you also talk about your grandfather. Do you think that was also, contributory to your activist streak?
Well, I think both my mother and my grandfather were very much contributing more to a recognition to respect animals and to protect them. So they were very instrumental on that. My father, on the other hand, he was a hunter and a fisherman, and he was completely opposite to that. So I had a lot of conflicts with him.
Yeah, you talk about that, and it does indicate maybe a less than happy childhood. You lost your mother when you were still young. You were so unhappy with your father that you ran away repeatedly. And your father, in frustration, actually had you committed to a psychiatric institution. Uh, Tell me about this terrifying experience, or how terrifying was it? And what did it give you as some insight into what animals must endure when they're captives of humans?
Well, yeah, when I was 14, I was running away from home so often that I think my father thought the solution was to have me committed to a mental hospital. I lasted there for about a week before I made my escape. But it was kind of like the cuckoo's nest, really, when I think back about it. But as soon as I got in there, I started to plan how to escape here. And I found out there's one kid about my age who had tried to escape a couple of times. So I, consulted with him and to what he had done. And it was in the wintertime. And so we were allowed to go over to the library, and we all wore pajamas, but we were allowed to wear a coat over our pajamas to go over to the library. What happened is we went down the stairs, and we were in the behind, and we opened the exit door and disabled the fire alarm and opened the exit door. And we had to go about a half a mile across an open field to jump on the freight train to take us to Toronto. And so that was my big prison break.
But that's an adventure. So you're in your pajamas with your overcoat heading for Toronto. Tell me how the whole experience of being captive by humans, did that give you any insight into what the animals must have experienced when they're captives of humans?
I don't think at the time it did. I was more interested in just getting out of there. But certainly when I think back about it, yeah, I've always been against confinement. And, and over the years, I've actually been arrested and I've been put in jail. I've never been convicted of a felony, but I've been arrested numerous times. And I once spent 120 days in a Dutch prison on attempt by Norway to extradite me, which failed. And, I spent a week here and a week there. But I've got an unblemished criminal record, but that still meant a lot of time going to jail. But I also remember that I think it was Abby Hoffman said, "Don't trust anybody who's never been in jail." And when you think about it, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, they all had their experiences there. And I think that does give an insight into the what confinement is all about, and certainly leads to an empathy for, if you go to the zoo and see the animals behind bars, you have a real empathy for them.
Yeah, I must confess, I've never been a prisoner, but I have covered prison stories and prison riots, and that was enough for me to feel the kind of empathy I think you think should be required by some. But you're being in prison, and what got you there was your activity as Captain Paul Watson. And then one day, you and a friend decided to create a Greenpeace campaign to save the whales in a way that no one has ever done before. And I guess that was sort of like, that was your first real shot at a kind of activist glory. Tell me about that.
Well, actually, we started in 1971 when we took a ship up to protest nuclear testing in Amchitka Island in the Aleutian Chain. Now, there are two groups that came together, the Sierra Club and the Quakers, and to oppose this. I actually, of all the people there, I had another reason for being there, and that was because Amchitka was a wildlife preserve, and you couldn't go onto the island with a gun, but they're going to blow a 5-megaton bomb up underneath it, and previous tests had killed a number of sea otters and sea lions and an untold number of fish. And so we sailed up. We got this idea to take the boat up there, and we had two boats, the Greenpeace and the Greenpeace 2, TOO. At one of the early meetings, somebody left and flashed a peace sign, and Bill Darnell, he said, make it a Greenpeace. And Bob Hunter said, great name for the boat. So we named the boat the Greenpeace. So that came before the organization. And then in 1972, we changed the name of the Don't Make a Wave Committee to the Greenpeace Foundation. So I was one of the founding directors of the Greenpeace Foundation. But the problem with Greenpeace is that it's the Quaker influence, which is bearing witness, which I've never agreed with. And that is, you don't intervene, you don't physically intervene, you bear witness. And, you don't walk down the street and see a woman being raped or a kitten or a dog being kicked to death and do nothing but take a picture and hang a banner. So I felt there had to be another way to do it. So I left in 77 to set up Sea Shepherd with the specific strategy of what I call aggressive nonviolence. We're going to aggressively intervene, but we're not going to injure anybody. And I've had an unblemished record. I've never caused an injury to a single person over the last 50 years, but we have shut down literally hundreds of illegal operations.
Yeah, aggressive nonviolence, though, would seem to be, you made it into a virtuous contradiction, because it sounds like a contradiction to be effective and to be activist and aggressive and nonviolent at the same time.
Also, to respect life over property. If a man is about to shoot an elephant and you knock the rifle out of his hand and destroy the rifle, you've destroyed a non-sentient object to save a living creature. So that is what really aggressive nonviolence is. The actions you need to take to save life. And unfortunately, we live in a world where property has more value than life, and therefore people see that as an act of violence. But we only oppose illegal activities. So the equipment that we destroy, the ships that we sink, are being used for illegal activities. So we're really simply upholding international law. That is the reason that I've never been convicted of a felony.
That was a good thing that you've never been convicted of a felony. But how do you think the world and other activists and others have embraced your idea? Or have they embraced your idea? Or have they rejected it somewhat and said, no, that's good for Paul, but we're going to go down another path?
Some have and some haven't. And I've had enough people who do agree with it that they supported me through the years in the various campaigns. And I've had over 6,000 crew volunteer on the ships over the years. So certainly have a lot of support there. I still do. But, I never really cared much for what people think of what I do. In 1986, we sank half of Iceland's whaling fleet, sent it to the bottom of the harbor in Reykjavik. And that might sound like it's illegal, but they never charged me for it. I had to actually fly to Reykjavik a year later and said, I haven't heard from you guys. I sank these ships. What are you going to do about it? And I landed at the airport, and the chief immigration officer, he says to me, well, how long do you intend to stay in Iceland? I said, I don't know, 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 years. You tell me. He said, we're going to have to go to interrogation. So the next morning, they put me on a plane and sent me back to New York City. The Minister of Justice stood up in the House. He says, who does he think he is? He comes into our country and demands to be arrested. Get him out of here. Because they knew that to put me on trial in Iceland would be to put themselves on trial for their illegal whaling activities. That's the last thing they wanted.
It has been and can be effective. Why are some people reluctant to embrace it, you think?
Well, we've been conditioned, to respect property at all costs, even though, that property is being used to take life. But at the time we sank those ships, I had a former colleague from Greenpeace. He said to me, well, what you did in Iceland was reprehensible and it was criminal, which it wasn't. And he said, and I said, yeah, so what? And he says, well, aren't you concerned about what people think about you, and I said, no, I'm not. I don't care. We didn't sink those ships for you. We sunk them for the whales. I said, find me a whale that disagrees with what we did, and I promise you we won't do it again. The whales, sharks, the birds, these are our clients. And people either support that or they don't. And if they don't, I don't really care. But if they do, well, I welcome their support.
Well, on your first trip out in your tiny boats against an enormous Russian whaler, you witnessed the murder of a whale, and it had a profound effect on you. And you write in your book, at that moment, my entire perspective shifted with the realization that the human species, my species, was clearly murderously insane. From that moment on, I said to myself that I would do everything I could to save whales, dolphins, and other species in the sea. I was done with the crazy concerns of humanity, with the politics, religion, economics, and trivialities of hominid primates. Tell me
Right.
about that moment.
We were trying to block them from killing whales by putting our bodies between the whales and the harpoons. And it was a great idea. We were reading a lot of Gandhi at the time. We thought it would work. But and it did for about 20 minutes. And Bob Hunter and I were in a small boat in front of a Soviet harpoon vessel with 8 whales fleeing for their life in front of us. And this, after 20 minutes, the captain came running down the catwalk and screamed into the ear of the harpooner, then brought his finger across his throat and looked down and smiled on us. And that's when I realized Gandhi was not going to work for us that day. And a few moments later, there was this horrendous explosion. The harpoon flew over our head, slammed into the backside of a female in the pod in front of us. She rolled on her side. There was blood everywhere. And suddenly the largest whale rose up out of the water, slammed the water with his tail, and dove and swam right underneath of us and threw himself straight at the bow of the Soviet harpoon vessel. But they were ready for him with an unattached harpoon, pulled the trigger, hit the whale point blank in the head, and he fell back in the water and screaming in agony. There's blood everywhere. And as he was thrashing about on the surface, I caught his eye. And then he dove again. And now I saw a trail of bloody bubbles coming at me real fast. And he came up and out of the water at an angle. The next move is to fall forward and crush us. But he didn't. And he was right there as his head came out of the water. I looked into an eye the size of my fist. And what I saw in that eye was understanding. The whale understood what we were trying to do because I could see the effort that he made to pull himself back. His body began to slide back into the sea. I saw his eye disappear beneath the surface and he died. He could have killed me. He chose not to do so. But then I was thinking, why were the Russians killing these whales? They're not eating them. They were killing them for sperm oil, spermaceti oil, and it was a highly prized oil for high heat resistant machinery. And one of the things that it was most highly prized for was in the construction and maintenance of intercontinental ballistic missiles. And I said to myself, here we are killing this incredibly beautiful, intelligent, socially complex, sentient, self-aware creature for the purpose of making a weapon meant for the mass extermination of human beings. And that's when it struck me, we have to be insane.
Yeah. What strikes me about that story is when you looked that whale in the eye and there was that communication and it was clear what was being communicated.
And that sort of has led me to a life of dedicating myself to this one great ambition to eradicate whaling from this planet completely. And we've done it. 90% of it is done. We stopped them in the Southern Ocean with the Japanese whaling fleet. Since I began, Australia, Chile, South Africa, South Korea, Spain have all stopped whaling. Whaling is now restricted to only the territorial waters of Norway, Iceland, the Danish Faroe Islands, and Japan. And right now we're focusing our attention on Iceland because they're targeting endangered fin whales. And I'm pretty confident we'll be able to shut them down next year.
One of the things about you that is a point of admiration among PETA supporters is that you have this single-mindedness that our supporters appreciate. But the journey hasn't always been easy or straightforward, even with Greenpeace, with whom you were working. They objected to a lot of these tactics that you used. Tell us about that schism or that divide that occurred.
Well, what happened in 1977? I was the campaign leader on the campaign to protect baby seals off the east coast of Labrador and Newfoundland. And what happened is that as I was crossing the ice, I saw a sealer about to club a baby seal with a club. And I ran forward and I got to him before he could club the seal. And I pulled the club out of his hand, threw it into the water, picked up the seal and took it to safety. That's what I thought I was there for. But the Greenpeace, a couple months later, Greenpeace board of directors called me and they said, well, they accused me of theft and vandalism. So you stole that man's property. You destroyed his property. I said, it was a sealing club. Of course I destroyed his property. And I saved the life of the seal. And that's why I thought I was there. And if I have to do it, if I had to do it over again, I would do it over again. And they said, well, I don't think you really understand what Greenpeace is all about. And I said, oh, I understand. I just don't want to be part of it. So, I don't want to see whales die. I don't want to see baby seals being clubbed. I want to intervene. I want to protect them.
And it was those Greenpeace Quaker values that got in the way again, I guess.
Yeah, and they're always using that saying like as some sort of self-righteous, sort of holier than thou attitude and everything. To me, it's cowardice, is what it is.
So eventually, you got your own ship, the Sea Shepherd, paid for by TV critic, writer, animal rights advocate Cleveland Amory. and you began your own organization of the same name. What strikes me in reading about all the work you did, both on and off the ship for many species, is that being an effective activist requires planning and strategy and also a nimbleness, an ability to think on your feet. You've got to be able to just go spontaneously and respond to these unexpected situations. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think you also have to be look at what you're doing as sort of an adventure, and be happy to do it, happy to take the risks and everything. People always ask me, how can you ask young people to risk their life to protect a whale? Because that's what I asked my crew. I said, are you willing to risk your life to protect a whale? And if they say no, then I said, well, then we don't need you. And I say to people, why is that so hard to understand? We ask young people all the time to risk their life, to give their life for flags and real estate and religion and oil wells. I think it's a far more noble thing to risk your life to protect a whale or a habitat. And so I think the problem is that we all have this anthropocentric point of view. As a society, we look at the world through the eyes of our own species only. It's all created for us. It's all about us. We're the only species that matters. A few years ago, I got Brett Hume from the Fox Network called me up, and he was angry. He said, "Did you say at a lecture that bees, trees, worms, and whales are more important than people?" I said, "Yes, I think I did say that." He said, "How could you say something so outrageous?" I said, "Well, I said it because they're more important than people, and I can tell you why. Because they can live here without us. We can't live here without them. We need them. They don't need us. Without them, we die." And that's the law of interdependence. The strength of an ecosystem is in diversity and interdependence. And if we don't recognize that, we're not going to survive. We have to look at the world from a biocentric point of view. The fact that we're part of everything, that we're intimately connected to everything else. We're interdependent with all of these species. We don't have agriculture without bees and worms. We don't have oxygen without phytoplankton and trees. I mean, we need them. And so that's the idea I'm trying to get across. Another way to explain it is if you look at the Earth as a spaceship, which is what it is on this incredible voyage around the Milky Way galaxy, and every spaceship has a life support system, and that life support system provides us with the air we breathe, the food we eat, regulates climate and temperature. And that life support system is maintained and operated by a crew of engineers, the engineers that keep all that machinery running. We humans, we're not engineers. We're passengers. We're having a wonderful time entertaining ourselves, but we're murdering the crew. We're killing off those engineers. And there's only so many engineers you can kill before the machinery begins to break down. We need the trees. We need the whales. We need the fishes. We need insects. We need bacterium. And without them, we don't survive.
So how do you suppose people, just regular rank and file people out there, get to that point? You've mentioned Gandhi a lot in our conversation. Does it help to meditate? Does it help to commune with nature? How do people get to that state where they realize the interdependency that you talk of?
I think it needs a paradigm shift away from anthropocentrism to biocentrism. We have to get over this thing that we're superior, dominant, and better than everything else. And every single major religion has humans at the center. That we're the most important thing. It was all created for us, and I think that's where we're wrong on that. We need to really look at it from an indigenous point of view, where indigenous people understand that they're connected to all other living things, that we're all one and the same. And our modern societies have set ourselves apart. We've alienated ourselves from the natural world.
I'm curious about the meditation part of my question, only because, especially when you're about to do something like, go after a ship or save a whale, or did you ever meditate? How do you get yourself in the right mindset to go and take that kind of aggressive nonviolence?
I don't do anything to get into that mindset. Just to walk in the woods, to swim in the ocean, pretty much is all it takes. So you go into the campaign. You have to be a little detached, especially when you're in a confrontation situation. You can't allow yourself to get emotional about it. You can't be angry about it. If I see a sealer come up and try to kill a seal, or if from a distance I see the seal being killed, I can't get angry at it that moment. I have to actually, find a way to intervene. and therefore you have to be calm, you have to be objective about it to do it effectively. So, and also you don't go in with anger towards the people who are doing it, the sealers, the whalers, the fishermen, because that's not going to really change anything, really. You have to focus on preventing them from doing what they're doing.
You discuss in the afterward how you were slowly removed from the leadership of Sea Shepherd, which is the organization you created. People see the accolades and see the great success that you had with the organization. One wonders, how could that happen?
Well, Sea Shepherd became too big because of whale wars, and it attracted a lot more people. There's an administration now, a lot of money coming in, and I was a threat to that because they called it the Watson problem. Every time I did a campaign or a confrontation, they thought that, we might lose our tax status, or we might get arrested, or we might be sued, and they became more concerned about that, and that was never a concern for me. And then they decided, it was in June of 2022, they said, well, we're going to go in a different direction, more mainstream, for example. And I said, well, sorry, I don't, I'm not going there. I don't support that. We've been doing this effectively for 45 years, and we're going to continue to do it. And they said, no, you're an employee. If you don't like it, too bad. So, I had to leave. But I immediately set up the Captain Paul Watson Foundation. I called it that because it's going to be hard to take that name away from me.
Yeah.
But the thing is that in that last year, since I left Sea Shepherd, we've got our first big ship, 2 small ships, and we're working on getting a second larger ship. We've got former crew members, former supporters, and within the last 12 months, we've raised over $6 million to do these campaigns. So it's certainly an advantage over when I left Greenpeace. I had nothing when I left Greenpeace, and it took me a few years to get off the ground. I had nothing when I left Sea Shepherd, and it only took me a few months to get off the ground. So that was a difference.
But on a personal level, did you see it as a betrayal, or did you see it as a divorce? I mean, because some people would see that you created something so large, and then they started putting their focus started going away from the purpose of Sea Shepherd and toward the preservation of the organization, it would seem.
Well, they didn't betray me. They betrayed the entire movement. Well, I had created a movement. I didn't want Sea Shepherd to be an organization. It was in dozens of countries. They were all independent entities. We had set up Sea Shepherd Global as a means to operate the ships and everything, and all the groups were to support the operations of the ships through Global. But what happened, there were 6 directors for Global, and 4 of them decided they wanted to control it all. So they removed me and Lami Essam Lami with an email. There was no vote. There was no discussion. We were just removed. And since then, they've removed 400 pages of my history. And I just noticed they just put out a video of the last 20 years of the history where they failed to mention that I even exist. I actually don't exist. It's sort of like the Bolsheviks removing the pictures from everything. It's all about control. It's all about power. And it's also about not doing what we were set out to do, but also giving the illusion, using the name Sea Shepherd, that they are continuing to do it. But they're not going to be doing confrontation anymore. Right now, they're getting supported by Allianz Insurance, Lloyd's of London, the Dutch Postal Code Lottery, numerous corporations and governments are working with. They like those partnerships. It brings in a lot of money.
Yeah,
I don't like those partnerships. I don't mind working with governments. In fact, I initiated it working with Ecuador to protect the Galapagos originally, but not at the expense of them telling us what to do and how to behave and having to, censor any press releases and not to embarrass them. So if we're working with the government and the government does something corrupt, we have to be able to expose that corruption, but they're not doing that anymore. And so now Sea Shepherd Global is working with these African countries that are extremely corrupt. And 3 of them actually support the Japanese at the International Whaling Commission. But the biggest betrayal of all was Sea Shepherd Australia doing a partnership with the Austral Fishing Company and the Marua Daiichiro Fishing Company of Japan. And people say, why would they do that? Because the CEO of Austral Fisheries got Sea Shepherd Australia their tax status in Australia, donated a boat, donated a lot of fuel, and donated something like $150,000 on top of that. So they sold out. And when I questioned that, I was removed from the Australian board of directors for questioning why are we working with a fishing company, and now they're supporting sustainable fishing. And in my position, from my point of view, there is no such thing as sustainable fishery. The commercial fisheries are destroying life in the sea. I mean, what is a sustainable fisherman? A guy who goes out in a canoe off the west coast of Africa and throws a line in the water. That's sustainable fishing. Not these giant super trawlers and long lines and gill nets. It's a mechanized, industrialized, strip mining of life in the ocean. We should not be supporting that, but they are.
So it sounds like the old the sea shepherd that exists now exists as a kind of cleansing agent for the sins of corporate America, or a kind of a whitewashing of all the activity that you fought as the head of the old Sea Shepherd, and now the Captain Paul Watson Foundation.
Even more than that, Sea Shepherd Global is suing Sea Shepherd France and me, saying we don't have the right to use the name or the logo or the flag. They even tried to say that I didn't have the right to use my own name. It's all about power. It's all about control. And, but it's not unusual. David Brower was forced out of the Sierra Club. David Foreman was forced out of Earth First. Rick O'Berry was forced out of his dolphin project. That's the problem. Activists, unfortunately, and I'm guilty of this too, we're more involved and more connected with the actions and doing things. And the administrators, people who take over the administration, sneak up and stab you in the back and take control. And they want to keep their comfortable position. They want their security. And my approach is threatening to their security.
Well, is it because Captain Paul Watson became this bigger than life character, that Captain Paul Watson became almost mythic with your victories, and that they needed to sacrifice you or somehow get rid of you in order to protect this institution that you had built up and that they could run?
I'm still involved with Sea Shepherd France and Sea Shepherd Brazil and Sea Shepherd UK, but Sea Shepherd UK has recently changed its name to the Captain Paul Watson Foundation UK. But the Sea Shepherd France and Sea Shepherd Brazil remain true to our original approach to the idea of aggressive nonviolence. The other Sea Shepherd groups are sold out. And it's because they get well-paid jobs. They're in comfortable positions, and they don't want to. I was offered a great deal of money just to stay involved, to shut up, say nothing, don't do interviews, don't write anything, and just collect a paycheck and sit on a beach somewhere. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I didn't start this movement to get rich.
Yeah. Are you still doing actions yourself personally? Are you still on the boats and leading the charge?
Yeah, this last summer we went to Iceland. When we arrived there was a temporary ban on whaling, which is good, and we'll be returning next June. We also went to the Faroe Islands to disrupt the killing of dolphins and pilot whales there. So yeah, I'm still very, very much involved. Always will be involved. I don't believe in retirement.
Yeah, and when you're out there, are you feeling the same thing today when you're out there on a boat as you did, say, when you were 12 and shooting a BB gun at a fellow student? Well, how do you feel?
As Farley Mowat said, I never grew up, and I guess I still haven't. I don't see myself as a responsible adult in that respect. Although, I have 3 children, and I'm, trying to instill in them, and I think very successfully, an appreciation, a love for nature and for animals. And, I think that's a responsibility of everybody, really, as a parent.
And just as an example for people who feel like that they're too old to do anything, they're too old to get out and take some kind of action. You say you're in your 70s.
I'll be 73 in December.
Wow. Happy birthday in advance.
Yeah. I don't really feel 73, but I've had a crew member who was 87 once. And, I don't think age is a restriction to being an activist.
It shouldn't be. Now, finally, at the close of your book, you provide aspiring activists at whatever age they are with the 10 most important things you have learned. And this is one that struck me. You write, "We each have the potential to change the world. Find your passion and harness it to the virtues of courage and imagination." So tell me about that
Well,
sentence?
I think there's numerous examples of that. Because of Diane Fossey, we still have mountain gorillas in Rwanda. Because of, David Wingate, we still have the Bermuda storm petrel in Bermuda. One person can make a difference, can save a species. I mean, look at Alex Pacheco and Ingrid Nuker with PETA and what's been done there. I mean, there's so many examples of individuals who've made incredible contributions to making this a better world and incredible contributions to protecting animals and ecosystems. So it's and the more and more so now. I mean, look what Greta Thunberg's been able to do just as a 16-year-old girl. So we all have that power. And also, don't get depressed or pessimistic, because one of the most invaluable things I ever learned was in 1973 when I volunteered as a medic for the American Indian movement. We were surrounded, we were being shot at, 2 people were killed, 46 people were wounded, and I went to to Russell Means, who was the leader of the American Indian movement. I said, we don't have any hope of winning. The odds against us are overwhelming. Why are we still here? And he told me something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. He said, we're not concerned about the odds against us. We're not concerned about winning or losing. We're here because it's the right place, the right time, and the right thing to do. Don't worry about the future. You have no power over the future. All of your power is in the present. It's what you do in the present that will define the future. So don't get depressed or don't get pessimistic about the future. Instead, put all of that energy in towards doing things in the present that will redefine what the future will be.
That's somewhat meditative as I listen to you. And I did ask, how do you find your passion? How do you find that thing that's the most important thing in the present moment?
Well, I just say you see a problem and you address it as best you can, keeping in mind a discipline of aggressive nonviolence. So I'm going to intervene, but I'm not going to hurt anybody. And that's been doing that consistently. And the thing that I think that keeps me going is the numbers of animals saved, the 6,500 whales we saved in the Southern Ocean, the seals that we saved, millions of seals we saved, because we pretty much shut that thing down in 2008. There still is a seal hunt. The quota is 400,000, but they take 40,000 because there's no market for the pelts, and it only exists because of the subsidies from the Canadian government. But what that means is over 350,000 seals are being saved every year that would have otherwise been killed. And so that's where I really get my inspiration and motivation, is in the numbers that are saved, and knowing that there are whales out there right now swimming that would not be there if it wasn't for our intervention.
Well, certainly measurable results. In that sentence that I read, we each have the potential to change the world, find your passion, and harness it to the virtues of courage and imagination. Those last 3 words, courage and imagination. How do you tap into that? And why does it take courage and imagination in your mind?
Well, you see a problem and you have to devise a plan. How do I address this problem? That's where the imagination part comes in. And then you have to have the courage to go forth with that plan, whatever that plan is. And you have to not be concerned about the consequences, really. In 1979, I tracked and hunted down this pirate whaler, the Sierra. It was a total outlaw whaling ship, killing everything it could find. I found it off the coast of Portugal. I chased it for 200 miles into a Portuguese port. Then I said to my crew, I said, look, all I can say is I'm going out there and I'm going to ram that vessel twice. I'm going to destroy that vessel. It's not going to kill a whale ever again. Now, I can't say you won't get hurt, but I can say you're probably going to go to jail. So I'll give you a choice. You got 10 minutes to pack your bags and get off this ship, or you can come with me. And of the 20, only two of them stayed with me. Fortunately, they were both engineers. And we pulled away and went out, and I rammed the Sierra. I put it out of commission. We got arrested by the Portuguese Navy, and I got brought before the port captain in Porto, in Portugal. And he charged me with gross negligence. And I said, Captain, there wasn't anything negligent about this. I hit that ship exactly where I intended to do it. It wasn't negligent. It was deliberate. And he laughed and he said, the problem is that I can't figure out who owns that ship. And until I find out who owns that ship, you're free to go. And so I walked out, and one of the crew members who got off, he said, well, if I knew you were going to get away with it, I would have been there with you. And I said, that's the thing. You have to do these things knowing you probably aren't going to get away with it. And it's amazing how many situations you can put yourself in, and you can walk through unscathed, that the other thing, just because you had the courage to do it. And so that's what you have to be able to do, not be worried about the consequences. In 1981, we landed in Soviet Siberia. We were the first people to invade the Soviet Union since World War II. And our objective was to get evidence on illegal whaling operations in Siberia. We went ashore. 2 Soviet soldiers are patrolling the beach, and they ignored us. Who else would be landing on a beach other than the Russians? So we went around for 45 minutes. We documented everything and just slowly walked back to the boat. And as I was pushing the boat out, one of the Russian soldiers, he's a young guy, but he came up and he said, "Что это? What is that?" And I said, "It's a Zodiac. It's a Zodiac." And he said, "It's the Mercury." And that's when I realized, oh, the Mercury outboard engine. Then he said, "American?" And I turned my back to him and began to push the boat out. And I said to the 2 guys in the boat, "What's he doing?" "He's taking his rifle down." I said, "Laugh and wave." And psychologically, nobody's going to shoot you if you're laughing and waving and everything, because especially in Russia, where nobody's going to make a decision that they know isn't the correct decision. And so then we headed down the coast, and suddenly, about 40 minutes later, 2 helicopter gunships came out of nowhere and started firing flares across their bow to stop us. And I just ignored them too. And then about another hour later, a big frigate comes up from real fast alongside and puts up the flags telling us to stop. I ignored that. Then he gets on the radio, says, "Sea Shepherd, stop your ship, prepare to be boarded by Soviet Union." And I said, "We don't have room for the Soviet Union. We're not stopping," and kept going. And, he didn't know how to deal with it, because navies don't know how to deal with no. They got this overwhelming force, and somebody says no to them. Now the only thing they can do now is fire or shoot at you. But now this guy's not going to do that unless he knows he's doing the right thing. And so by the time he was able to find out what was going on, we were back in U.S. waters. Doesn't always work that way. When we confronted the Norwegian Navy in 94, I refused to stop. And they said, "I have the orders from the highest authority in Norway to do whatever it takes to stop you." And I said, "Well, do whatever it takes." So he fired 1 shot over our top of us, another shot in front of us. I just kept going. He dropped 4 depth charges underneath of us, just kept going. And then he tried to cut us off, but he made a mistake and rammed our bow, which pretty much sliced open his hull by about 45 feet. So he did more damage to himself by doing that. And then we just kept carrying on until we reached the Shetland Islands. A 500-mile chase, couldn't get on board. So you just have to be willing to take them on. Actually, when he was about to shoot, he says, "I'm going to put the 3rd shot into your engine room. So get everybody out of the engine room." I said, "Nobody wants to go out." And I said, "By the way, I've got 13 journalists on board, so fire away." And,
the power of journalism.
Well, he said, "If anybody's killed, it's going to be your fault." I said, "My hand's not on the trigger. It's not my fault."
So, a lot of the things you describe, it's almost like it's right up there on the edge of, life and death.
Yes. But if people have to, people risk their life all the time. Firemen, policemen, all sorts of people, ambulance people. I mean, medics and that. So, risking your life for something that you believe in is not that unusual.
That's why it takes courage. And that's the thing about Hitman for the Kindness Club. It's a kind of how-to do the activism in your heart. Captain Paul Watson, any final words for listeners about your journey and about taking that journey of activism?
Well, I can certainly say something about PETA. PETA, ever since it began, has had no problem with, confronting people who need to be confronted. That's a great example of using your imagination. All of the various campaigns have demonstrated an incredible imagination. A lot of people in PETA I work with have been on the crew and worked with very closely. I think PETA is a good example of coming up with imaginative tactics and courageously implementing those tactics, and with great results.
Hey, Captain Paul, thank you very much. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for being part of the PETA Podcast.
Oh, thank you. Been a pleasure.
Good luck on the book. Hopefully we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you.
Captain Paul Watson, the man who saved the whales with Sea Shepherd and Greenpeace. His new book, Hitman for the Kindness Club. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of the show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. You can contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at amok.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Or get this podcast on YouTube at Emil Amok 1. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to, as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.